And at the Global Institute of Creative Thinking, we're trying to create a movement for change, a movement which will ultimately have every young person able to develop their critical and creative thinking in schools as a right, all young people, picking up on the points that Cryos was making. But if we're going to do that, we have to base it on firm foundations. And in this afternoon's session, we're going to be looking at 3 of those foundations: curriculum, assessment, and professional learning. Tomorrow we'll have a look at leadership, we'll have a deep dive into some of the brilliant work that individual schools are doing, start to get a sense of the enormous variety that's taking place amongst you positive deviants, because that's what you are, wonderful positive deviants, showing us how it can be done. We'll have another look too at some of the big system and school-based leadership issues, and I'll kick that off tomorrow. But for now, it's my absolute pleasure to shift Stéphan from the moderating position into the speaking position. You've had a go at understanding and seeing some of the many skills that Stéphan brings to this, but you haven't yet met my colleague Cassie Hague on my left, your right. Cassie is a very experienced analyst here at SERI and has a deep understanding of critical and creative thinking and has been very much behind the development of the framework that she'll talk about. And then next one along, Rory McGann from Creative Ireland, I think I need to say, don't I, Rory? He'll tell us some more about that. He's going to act as a critical reflector to what he hears from both Stéphan and Cassie. Lovely to have you here, Rory, from the University of Limerick. And roughly the focus, or my attempt, will be 30 minutes worth from my 2 colleagues here. She's looking 35 minutes at a push from my 2 colleagues here, and then 5 minutes from Rory, and then I'll open it up for discussion and questions from the floor. Stéphan.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Also, what I'm going to do is, it's indeed a 2-act presentation with Cassie. I'm going to, present to you the work that we've done, in the past few years. That, Andreas Schlascher gave you some first ideas, and I'm going to show you in more details. And then Cassie will talk about, what is coming next and how we want actually to translate this into a professional learning or further professional learning. So basically, what we've been, doing is the question we had was really how to improve education, by focusing on creativity and critical thinking. One of, the context for that was basically, that we work in an organization that is called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and so where, there is a kind of economic agenda. And at the same time, and as we could hear this morning from Minister Costa, a lot of shifts toward competency-based curricula in most countries, and so these questions of, the false dichotomies he's spoken about between knowledge and competence. And one of the big questions for many countries was, how do we do that? How do we implement a competency-based curriculum? And what does it mean for the knowledge that we have? So what we've tried to actually do during this project was to showcase, what this change could look like, and work with practitioners, with teachers, with pedagogues, experts, etc., and to actually create a kind of vision and create a method to actually do that. And that's how it's going to connect. I'm going to show you some tools that we have already developed, but one of the things we've done is try to be, I would say, more practical than we are usual. So of course we have still produced a report because that's what we do, but we're also trying to actually develop some resources for people on the ground. So why? We've spoken a lot about it, so some reasons are economic, and at the beginning of this work, we've looked at actually the competencies that people use in their job, and we were working on innovation, and so what are the innovative skills, what are the use of the skills that are used by people who have an innovative job compared to the other ones, and you could see that coming with new ideas and willingness to question ideas, which are, let's say, correlates of creativity, if not creativity itself, came very much on top of the list. And there is a lot of different surveys from, in different places, from employers, from showing that actually creativity, critical thinking, complex problem solving, innovation are something which are in high demand. Interestingly, at the time, we were also linking all this, and actually that's some of the rationale, to digitalization and the fact that, you know, computers were going to take a lot of the jobs that were not specifically human and required critical thinking, creativity, and now we are in a slightly different discussion, but with the rise of generative AI, and that's, you know, an interesting challenge for us as well. Even so, we are the economic cooperation and development organization. You know, our motto is better policies for better lives, you know, and so we also have this well-being dimension, and, you know, and we are concerned with the well-being of democracies. And so that's also one of the rationales of the work, you know, the fact that creativity makes us feel good as human beings, and critical thinking is obviously important for our democracies and be engaged citizens. So what we did was, starting from the research literature on creativity and critical thinking, you know, thing that we do, and try to see what are the, I would say, points of convergence and divergence in these different things. And basically, you know, in the case of creativity, so we've taken that definition, the ability to produce work that is both novel and appropriate. What we've discovered is that it's very important to have some kind of definition when you want to develop something. And you can see we have a beautiful cartoon that was designed by Grant Snyder for us to kind of illustrate the way that we've thought about it. But I'm not going to go into that. Many specialists in the room. But yeah, basically that's something which was relatively new, you know, in the case of the educational setting, contrary to critical thinking, which is already very present. Even so, I would argue sometimes that it's more difficult to change and less well understood, you know, compared to creativity or creative thinking. And basically, you know, there are commonalities between these two things, you know. So critical thinking is really about evaluating and judging and taking a position that doesn't have to be original, contrary to or even, you know, for oneself compared to creativity. But the two ideas have something to do with perspective taking, and that's why we have actually worked with these two big competencies together. So, from an educational perspective, you know, our starting point was really that, you know, the big question that we've had, you know, so we actually, and it's very healthy probably that we ask this question all the time, you know, what should we teach? What are the things that should be fostered? And one way to think about them is that we have focused a lot on the technical skills in a discipline, you know, the know what and the know how, and I would say that originally that's really what PISA has focused on a lot. Now we are trying to, you know, go back or to promote again a more holistic education and, you know, try to develop, to have, you know, the higher order skills. I know PISA is also looking into that. And the social and emotional skills, we have a specific survey on that at the OECD, and actually PISA does a bit of that as well. And so the idea that all these things actually do overlap, you know, so you need to know something if you want to be creative or to be a critical thinker in the domain. You need to have some level of persistence, you know, and if you want to get to know something as well. But the point is that you have to pay attention to all these different things and not assume that because you have, let's say, a good grade in science, that means that everything comes together and you have tested and you have developed everything. So the idea of this competency-based curricula is basically that, you know, we have to pay attention to the different competencies that we want to instill without renouncing to the knowledge, because indeed this is a false dichotomy. This is not an agenda that is terribly controversial, you know. So usually when you work on something innovative, people tell you that there is resistance to change, people don't want it to happen. You can see here, you know, in most countries, well, actually, there are a few where it is not exactly the same, the UK or France, for example, where you have more people believing that basic academic skills and encouraging discipline is what schools should be doing compared to creative and thinking independently. But in most countries, people agree with that, you know, it is not revolutionary. And so the big question is really, how do we do it, you know? And so what we like all these words, we love them, you know, I want more creativity, I want more innovation, I want more, but I'm not sure how to do that. So we've actually worked with a group of people to try to have a common language on that, to work on it internationally, and to see what it means in the context of education, you know. So what does it mean for educators? And the intuition we had at the beginning was that, in fact, you know, teachers already do it, they already know, but it's a lot of tacit knowledge, and what we need to do is really to try to codify it. And actually give some examples to actually make people see what it looks like, how it embodies in teaching and assessment practices, develop and work with people on how to actually have professional development plans. So how can we work with teachers to make all these things different happen? And last but not least, and especially when you're the OECD and you tell everyone that they should evaluate what they do, you know, and you know, try to walk the talk and try to develop evaluation instruments so that we can see to what extent, you know, the work that we do is taking us in the direction that we wanted. So we've been working, so that's, I would describe it as a practice engage project. You know, we've been working with practitioners, co-designing things with different groups. We've piloted them over 2 school years in the case of primary and secondary education in very diverse countries with very diverse professional, teaching professional cultures. And we've also done it, you know, in higher education, continued the work in that and continued to learn about how to implement all these different things. And basically the general idea of the project, or if we wanted to have an efficacy study to test whether what we're doing works, you know, the idea is to work with teachers, to provide them with examples, you know, with tools on creativity, examples of how this is happening, providing them with some level of teacher professional learning activities, and ask them to redesign what they're doing and have an interactive process of learning thanks to that. And what we hope is that, you know, they're thinking about how to, you know, embed creativity and critical thinking will change, and of course the practices will change as well, and ultimately that, you know, the students will benefit from all these different things. So we've put together a lot of the resources that we have, the exemplars that we've taken back from the ground, you know, into this app, and Cassie will talk more about it later on. And initially, I would say, you know, probably, and I was a bit naive, and we've started, you know, working with Bill's rubric as well, you know, the 5 Habits of Mind rubric, which was actually one of the starting points of the work that we've been doing, and a paper that Bill wrote some time ago. And to develop, you know, rubrics, and I must say at that time I was thinking that this is a common language, you know, we'll have a rubric and then that will be it, you know. Well, it's not exactly what happened. So we've used different types of rubrics. So if you're not aware of what a rubrics is, you know, so that's actually not the typical rubric, but the idea of a rubric is to simplify things, you know. So it's going from the big ideas of creativity and critical thinking to something that can be easily memorized and that actually makes sense for a teacher in a classroom. So what we hope is that after a certain time of practice, you know, the teachers will just remember inquiring, imagining, doing, reflecting, and they will know more or less what the other things, you know. So initially you need the words, and then after a while, you know, you don't need them anymore. As someone told me, it's a bit like a recipe, and it's a thing, you know. It's once you know how to cook something, then you don't need the recipe anymore, you know, you just do it. But what we've learned from the field is that actually these rubrics, we had to create a portfolio of different types of rubrics because teachers wanted them for their subject. They wanted more or less elaborated, so we have what we've called the class-friendly, so that teachers can talk with their students, and we have one which is more comprehensive if they want to do more, etc. The other thing that they always wanted is, well, give us examples, you know, what does it look like? We were telling them, but you're the ones telling us what it looks like, you know, but they said, oh, tell us too, you know. So that was, so we've ended up developing a lot of different examples to showcase how these ideas can look like in a lesson plan. And we've worked with, you know, the teachers who are part of the network. We've worked with expert pedagogues. We got these things peer-reviewed, you know, and we have different types, you know, from lesson plans which are relatively scripted to ones which are pretty open, and which have a lot of more open types of activities. So to give you one example, or two examples actually, so that's one that we have for music, and where basically students are asked to choose an area of their school and then to compose something that reproduces the sounds of this area, then perform it to their students who try to find what place that is, and then evaluate and give feedback on that. So what's interesting here is that, well, it's a creative activity in some ways, where you can develop your creativity, your critical thinking to some extent as well, when you're giving feedback, etc. But very importantly, where you actually learn something about music, you learn, so it is not, I'm doing a class on creativity, but I'm actually teaching music and I'm giving my students opportunities to develop their creativity and their critical thinking. Well, another one, which is actually one that one of our colleagues, Sylvia Nemes, has, was one of the big inspiration. My region, What If, is one which is more, about counterfactuals. So imagine that one event in your region had not happened. What would have happened? And so can you think of, from a perspective of different social groups, try to imagine what the implications would have been, and then think of different possible futures for that. So here again, you are developing your critical thinking, your creativity, because you're asked to develop something, to enact it. But you develop your language skills, your history skills, and you learn something about this, the culture or technology, depending on, the different paths that you have taken. This one I like very much. I use it usually to show how generative AI can be used to do that, because when you ask people, for example, to develop a kind of small drama piece, well, actually, if you can do more and you have a generative AI that can help you to generate a little bit more before you can edit it, etc., you can actually ask them to do much more than what you would have asked in the past, So as a productivity tool, it is actually something which can be interesting. You could also use it to help you to brainstorm, on this region that you don't know. You still have to verify that it is true. You can ask, you can also have different perspectives, because people, the students will have different prompts for the chat GPT. And then you can have also some discussions in group, about what these different things can mean, and even talk about, the strengths and weaknesses of AI for that. So you can actually integrate these different aspects of it. We've spoken about assessment, and obviously this is another thing which is very important. And so we've developed, this also assessment rubrics on creativity and critical thinking, which try to articulate different levels of performance for these different skills. But I would say what we've learned from the field, and here you can see that it's never 7 nor 10, 8, very creative. So that one of the initial challenges is actually, to get students engaged, and that's, I've discovered, it's one much more difficult than what you would imagine, so because a lot of things that we find very engaging are not so engaging necessarily to children, and many things that are sometimes engaging we tend to find too difficult, or we don't want to get there for multiplicity of reasons. We've seen a lot of things that actually ticked all the boxes of the rubrics that we had, but it wasn't challenging enough, so that was for the students. So actually that's also one of the lessons we've learned. Many cases we had a divorce between the technical knowledge and the creativity. So basically what teachers would do was to say, well, let's do a bit of creativity to start with. So, let's do some shapes, colored shapes for the mathematics, and then we'll do the math, That's not exactly the idea, because the idea was really to try to do these things simultaneously. And then something which was more difficult than we thought, was to actually have a product. We have doing in the rubric, so you would expect that people have to do something, but perhaps we're so used to prepare, to learn things so that we can take a quiz, a test, and then move on to the next course, that it happened to be more difficult than we had accepted. And here are the ones that are difficult for teachers in many ways, so it's leave room for your students to be part of, the lesson, so have students co-design part of the product, or the solution, or the problem, you know, so that don't give something which is totally close-ended, you know, from time to time at least, and choose, and that's the difficult part too, you know, choose problem that can be actually looked at from different perspectives, because otherwise there isn't much, which leads you to mean that as a teacher you cannot control everything, and there will be a few things that actually will be unexpected, and you have to live with that. And the last one is a lesson for all of us, you know, that's the thing that we never do and that teachers don't do and no one else. So basically it's a lot of preparation, a lot of, you know, structuring, but once you perform, a lot of let go, you know, and see what's happening in many ways. So I'm going to skip that, not to take, well, in fact, the only thing I wanted to say on that one is that one of the things we've learned is that when you do these things as a method, you know, we're talking a lot about professional learning community. That's a way to, you know, to develop teachers, and that's exactly what you do when you do this kind of project. You know, you get people to talk to each other about these ideas, you know, and to talk with their colleagues. And why? Because they're not sure how to do it, and so then it really creates a need to share professional expertise and practices, and that's really one of the very strong, I would say, positive consequences of this type of project. So to end up, you know, very important to be clear about what you're talking about, you know, give examples, professional learning opportunities, and I haven't dwelt too much on that, but it's coming, and, you know, give the right task, assignments, and assessment criteria so that actually it makes sense to people. Thank you very much.
Stéphan, thanks so much. Just before I pass to Cassie, just to clarify, Stéphan said that one of the things that unites the UK and France is that we're way off the pace when it comes to understanding what matters in education. Given that my colleagues here from Wales, Scotland, England and Northern Ireland might not think they're necessarily in the same place, I'd just like to put that on record. I'm looking at my Welsh colleague over there. Over to you, Cassie.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Stéphan. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about the draft professional learning framework that we've developed. Before I do that, I'm aware that it's kind of after lunch and that there hasn't been very much interaction, so I thought it would be nice to introduce a couple of minutes for you guys to talk to each other. So I would invite you to turn to your neighbour and talk for a few minutes about your best professional learning experience, and come up with a couple of words that describe why it was a positive experience for you. And if you haven't had a great professional learning experience, then you can also tell us some words about why they were so bad. Just a few minutes to talk amongst yourselves. Okay, everyone. I know that wasn't much time, but if I could invite you to come back to plenary was a sign of a good conversation. We can just go home.
Here's the bell. Here's the bell. The bell.
Turn the light off when you...
Ring that bell there.
So thank you, everyone. So it's not that I haven't bothered to write the presentation, but I just thought that I would get some input from you. So you could just maybe shout out some of the words that you came up with, and Federico is volunteered to write them down for us. So anyone, any words to describe your best professional learning experience? Inspiring.
Use the mic.
Using empathy, helping the learner put themselves in the shoes, helping you put yourself in the shoes of the learner.
Please use the microphone.
Yeah, maybe not shout, maybe.
Immersion.
Interact.
Chat. Reflect.
Collaborative.
Practical exercises.
Intentional. Sorry. Yeah. I just wanted to get.
Sorry, didn't realise I didn't have the mic on. Thank you, everyone. So we were just saying, well, we can go home now. 'Cause here we have a list of sort of principles to bear in mind when designing professional learning. So let me tell you a little bit about this document that we have produced. It's a draft professional learning framework. But why did we want to produce a professional learning framework for fostering creativity and critical thinking in the first place? Well, first of all, of course, it was about supporting teachers and exploring what it looks like in the classroom. Stéphan talked a little bit about the fact that one of the starting places for this project was really the insight that although many teachers are very supportive and see the value of creativity and critical thinking in the classroom, they don't always know what that means for their own teaching, how to integrate it with what they're already doing, how to make sure that it supports the development of subject knowledge rather than being a sort of add-on. We heard Andreas talk this morning about the fact that one of the barriers to integrating creativity and critical thinking is the lack of professional learning and the lack of pedagogical resources. And we were aware that we have this kind of vast range of of pedagogical resources, and we hope that they will be useful to kind of individuals and institutions, but how much more useful would they be if they were integrated into a sort of program of professional learning? And we wanted, of course, to draw on the learnings from our work that goes sort of across primary, secondary, higher education, initial teacher education, and now squaring the circle to look at in-service teacher professional learning. We call it a framework because it is it's designed to be adaptable and customizable, but to have a certain level of conceptual fidelity to the ideas, that sort of common language that the project established through the use of rubrics and drawing on the work of Bill and others. It uses all of the project's pedagogical resources and the app is now expanded to include the higher education materials, which are coming soon. But the app also provides individual activities, so it's not necessarily the case that everyone has to wade through this very large document. The individual activities will be available on the app that could be used for workshops or for self-study. So the idea is that this will actually be implemented on the ground in groups that are facilitated by local coordinators. But there will also be the possibility to find those activities on the app and perhaps to, go back to school and facilitate a workshop with colleagues using the materials that you have already studied yourself. It's designed with certain principles in mind, so it really starts by building on the idea of teacher expertise. It's not a deficit model. It's not saying that teachers don't know enough. It's really starting with teacher expertise, respecting their professional knowledge and experience, and encouraging kind of professional dialogue to help teachers shift their practice. So it's designed, at least, to be applied, to have peer support, to be active, experiential, and cooperative. But, of course, there is the challenge of working across countries that have really diverse traditions of teaching and learning, have different expectations around professional learning, for example, around the balance between content delivery and discussion. And also, of course, have different curricula, different levels of focus on creativity and critical thinking. So that's part of the reason that this is still a draft document. It's not because it's half finished. It's because we want to implement it and we want to learn and improve from that implementation and to kind of create more informed facilitation guides and handouts and activities that can be more applicable and adaptable to country contexts. So Stéphan already showed these cartoons. We have them available in, I think, 16 different languages or something. But we're really in effect trying to walk the talk a little bit here, and we're trying to engage in an iterative kind of creative process that involves, you know, kind of public revision and questioning of our assumptions. In terms of its format, it has 10 modules, and I will go a little bit faster, Bill, I promise. It has 10 modules, so 4 for creativity and 4 for critical thinking that are very similar in their form. So its first module is introduction to the concepts, then planning and learning design, then teaching and delivery and assessment for creativity, and the same for critical thinking. And then there are 2 modules on institutional-wide creativity and critical thinking, which is aimed more at institutional leaders, and 1 on system-wide creativity and critical thinking aimed more at policymakers. There is quite a level of similarity between the creativity and critical thinking modules, and in part that's deliberate. Well, that is deliberate because we're aware that people may take either the creativity activities or the critical thinking activities, and there was a need for some of the content, you know, is similar, but we have also made attempts to pull them apart in certain ways. And it will certainly be the case that the focus of discussion in the different modules will be very different, and the examples used will be very different. So it does not need to be implemented in its entirety. We are aware that it's a bit of a doorstep of a document. It has 8 activities in each module, so there's about 64 different activities. It could be implemented to focus just on creativity or critical thinking, or on both, and it could be delivered in terms of individual activities. But we've also offered shorter pathways, which are combined activities from the different modules, or each module could be offered individually, and we've offered both kind of accelerated and extended versions of each module, or of course it could be offered in terms of all of the modules. In terms of its attention to discipline and educational levels, of course it wasn't possible to cover every discipline, but what we do is draw from the example lesson plans that Stéphan was talking about earlier, and we have those lesson plans in a range of subjects. So I think the focus is music, maths, science, language arts, visual arts, there's environmental science, there's interdisciplinary, there's primary, and there's secondary. So the focus of the professional learning will depend on the kind of examples that are being discussed. And because it starts from participants' teaching context, the idea is that they bring in those concerns that they have in their disciplinary teaching. It could be implemented in groups of the same discipline or in multidisciplinary groups. So obviously if it was the same discipline, that gives a chance to go into really depth into creativity and critical thinking in that particular discipline. If it's multidisciplinary, that allows for kind of comparative discussion and examples. And of course there's the possibility for further adaptation. A couple of examples, well, maybe just one example activity, because I think it would be nice to give Rory the floor and to hear from you. But so this is about spotting space for creativity. It's in the learning design module, and groups pick 1 or 2 of the example lesson plans from the app, and they discuss the lesson plan, and these lesson plans of course already build in space for creativity and or critical thinking. So they discuss where that creativity might be being fostered within the lesson and why. They discuss ideas to strengthen that, and then they do the same for another lesson plan that doesn't explicitly focus on creativity, identifying opportunities to amend or increase creativity in that lesson plan. So really just starting from the example to build up their thinking about that before moving on to actually design their own lesson plans. Another example is around classroom talk and critical thinking around building a linguistic profile of their teaching. There's activities around facilitating productive failure, around learning environments. We talk about in the document the importance of sort of monitoring participant learning and give different possibilities for that, including learning journals. People will be developing learning resources, people will be putting together a teaching portfolio and also a student portfolio. We have included facilitation guides that cover some of the content that facilitators can draw on, and also how they might overcome some potential challenges that might arise in the facilitation. Again, those are to be expanded after implementation. And we try within those facilitation guides and regularly within the activities to kind of highlight meta moments when there's a moment for the participants and the facilitator to kind of step back and discuss how the facilitation and the learning experience of the professional learning is modeling or not some of the pedagogies that the teachers might be interested in developing in their own teaching. Next steps are adaptation, implementation, monitoring and improvement, and we can go into further details, but for the sake of time, I will just tell you about the revisions that we've already made. So this is a document that's gone through several iterations already. We've shown it to our participants in the higher education strand of the project. We've had a meeting of advisors, and the framework has really benefited from the input of many people, including Bill and many of yourselves. And during those revisions, we've tried to introduce more creative and critical pedagogies to really try to make sure that the learning is modelling some of the pedagogies that we're talking about, where that's possible and relevant. We've tried, you know, it already had a lot of attention to equity and inclusion, but we've tried to build that in further. As we've developed it, we've added more differentiation between the modules, added more examples. We've added more suggestions for shorter learning pathways through the material, a little bit more attention to creating shared understanding of what we mean by creativity and critical thinking, and adding those facilitation guides. And there's much more to come. And that was all I wanted to say.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Cassie. And just before I bring Rory in, Rory's going to, and has planned to, say a few things. His first reflections on listening to that. Rory's a trained teacher, so that felt really helpful as well. Then I'm going to roll on, try and get as many other reflective comments. We're not going to necessarily take questions, but try and build a sense of advice, really, critical friendship, so that as we iterate this, we can make it even better. It's a fantastic job, and the work that Cassie's put in on this already is absolutely brilliant. Rory.
Thanks, Bill. And I suppose Bill engaged in a bit of stereotyping. I'm going to do the same. You've made a huge mistake in opening up the mic to an Irish guy and expecting him to talk just for 5 minutes. So, but we'll see how we get on. Look, as Bill said, I'm bringing a couple of different lenses to this. Obviously, I've been involved in some of the iterations around the project with some feedback and things like that. I'm also bringing the primary teaching background to it, and some of the questions that primary teachers on the ground will ask about engaging in this type of professional learning network. Obviously, my role currently as a lecturer in pre-service teacher education, which brings its own lens as well. It was great, I think, starting off the morning, and we were listening to Minister Costa talking about the need to move away from justifying the importance of creativity and critical thinking. Now, as the discussion around AI went on, I started to flip-flop on that a little bit and wonder, but the more I think about it, the more I think that the technological advances really emphasize the need for creativity and critical thinking. Obviously, the framework is designed to address some of the pedagogical needs that people had alluded to, like the inspiration, the empathy, the challenging assumptions, opportunities for reflection, collaborative learning experiences, teacher agency that the people in the room all mentioned a few minutes ago. For me, looking through the document and having a chance to interrogate it from those lenses, obviously it provides, I think, a foundational understanding. Okay, with some differing language, I would have said some core language, but with some differing slants on it, of what creativity and critical thinking is. Because when you talk to teachers, most people will value creativity and critical thinking, but then you ask them to define or explain what exactly it is or what it might look like in the classroom for them. Some teachers can struggle with that. And they acknowledge the value, but maybe need some nurturing around recognising and supporting creativity in their own practice. Obviously, as I was looking through it, I got a sense of creativity as being defined as the canvas for where imagination can colour the contours of possibility. And I know Vlad Lavenue spoke about possibilities thinking earlier on. And then in terms of critical thinking around a lens through which clarity in a complex world can be achieved. Particularly important in terms of the role of AI. One of the things for me in the document was the assessment piece. And Andreas Schneider alluded to it earlier on. And some of the difficulties around changing our mindset around assessment of creativity and critical thinking, what that might look like. And I jotted down something on the plane yesterday when I was reading through it around maybe assessing creativity and critical thinking is akin to capturing a melody. It's about appreciating the harmony, not just the counting of the notes. All right, and some of the exemplars and the work that's presented within the framework, obviously Cassie and her team and Stéphan have done fantastic work on it, but it challenges practitioners to move beyond traditional methods to more holistic, nuanced approaches that capture the essence of student learning, really, which is essentially what we're all about. One of the things that really stood out for me was the practical application and the flexibility. It's the whole document, okay, 111 pages, as Cassie said, a fantastic piece of work, but a menu or a recipe or a toolkit, whatever what you want to call it, it does allow teachers, or I think it will allow teachers to act like a chameleon almost. Embracing the colours of whatever environment teachers find them in, while still maintaining the essence of the document and the guidance that it provides to teachers. There's clear learning outcomes, and I'm conscious of time. There's clear learning outcomes, obviously. One of the other nice things about it is it transcends classroom boundaries and draws in policymakers and it draws in institutional leaders, policymakers, and involve them in the process of how do we develop creativity and critical thinking. One of the other things I liked about it, and one of the speakers mentioned earlier on, it does offer potential for other collective wisdom. So if teachers wanted to engage a bit further, it's obviously integrating some of the great minds and some of the great literature around creativity and critical thinking, and providing signposts for teachers of where they might like to go to get research-backed or research evidence approaches. Some of the people, the eminent scholars, are in this room. And obviously, as a whole, and Vlad, you mentioned it earlier on, it's challenging teachers to look at their own preconceptions, their context, and see what's possible. That kind of possibilities mindset of their evolution of understanding, their definition, their implementation of creativity and critical thinking practices within their own settings. Obviously, the supporting app is a huge benefit for teachers in schools. Being a primary school teacher, show me where I can get ideas, show me where I can get lesson notes, show me where I can get resources that I can use in my classroom. Okay, you might have to iterate or adapt some of those content, but it really does give you a signpost in terms of that. Now, obviously, there are some challenges that go with the framework, and I would have spoken to Cassie about some of these, and she's alluded to the volume of content could be a little bit off-putting for some teachers to engage in. But I think anything that I mentioned around the challenges has been addressed through the 7 or 8 different iterations around, obviously, the volume of material, but there's options to customize through learning pathways that can be modular design, things like that. One of the big things for me is about facilitator dependency. I would look at this framework being heavily dependent on the facilitator network, or who's in a particular context, what training, what comfort, what experience they have, and then obviously there's huge possibilities within teacher education or national CPD programs to roll out this particular initiative. In conclusion, told you it was a mistake to give me the microphone, but I suppose, look, to sum it up, the framework is kind of a testament to the shared commitment to the generation of creative thinkers and problem solvers. I would see it as a call to action for all of us, urging us to weave creativity and critical thinking into our everyday fabric and educational practice. Navigating the future of creativity and critical thinking in education does require a compass, as somebody had alluded to, or one of the speakers alluded to earlier on. And I think the framework gives us some potential to inform the direction that we'll head in.
Rory, thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant, lyrical, and so insightful. And you ended with that tone that I'm going to try and encourage us all to continue with, which is a sort of spirit of you might like to, you might like to. So if you've got thoughts in your head, in your heart, in your hands now about what you might like to see, a really fantastic professional learning program to have as its core elements, then get ready to turn your little name tag, your big name tag up on its side, and I'll try and get as many colleagues as possible. So now's the turning your tag up to one side moment, and don't forget that I know some of you, and I might just point at you anyway, if you're not going to do that. Who'd like to kick us off? Yes, right down here.
Hi, I'm Keisha Thompson from Manchester in the UK. I wanted to hear a bit more about Creative Island, just because from what I understand of it, it is more expansive than the education sector, which
I'm just going to stop you there because that's a perfect conversation, if you don't mind, with Rory, and it's brilliant and very exciting what they've been doing. Just focusing on this more generic professional learning framework, who'd like to go next? Please catch my eye or make a loud clonk on the table. Is that a little? Yes, over here.
Yes, thank you. We are using the framework for 3 years now in the teacher department in Nice. Do you want to hear something about that? Yes. Okay, just checking.
It's not a you might like to, it's a we are.
Okay, thank you. So we decided to use this rubric, and our students are forced to create creative technology educational projects. So it's not an option, they just have to do it. And we are on the 3rd or the 4th run, I think, where we use your rubric. And our experience now is that we first have to focus on imagination. Because if you ask a French teacher, what is your ideal creative class, then they say, I just want my pupils to listen to me. And there their creativity stops. So we now start with having them to think about being creative, and we allow them to use everything, even time travel. So that's how we start, and then we ask them to really go deeper and make it more real, so that they come up with a project that they can actually develop. And actually we do this as a collaborative project, 3 students, and just so far everyone succeeded. It is much easier with our future primary education students, because the secondary school teachers are really hard, even in pre-service.
I'm going to pause you there because we were just, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Do talk more to Cassie, who was scribbling as you were talking. Other you might like to, other suggestions, other reflections from your own experience that you'd like to share. Yes, Vlad.
If I can work the mic correctly this time. So excellent. Thank you so much for the presentations. I wasn't the most familiar with the framework, and I'm excited to see this combo of creative and critical. I was just thinking about the definition of critical thinking that flashed before my eyes. I think it was creativity was generating ideas, and then critical thinking involved in evaluating ideas. Is that correct? Yeah. I was thinking about what role does, and I'm building here from Alex's question from earlier, what role does ethical thinking and the wise choosing between alternatives do you think plays in critical thinking? Is critical thinking leading to more wise decisions or not necessarily?
Feel free to leave us some questions, as Vlad beautifully did there. Time just to take 2 more because we must start, we're rolling straight into the next session, and it's an online session, so we need to go seamlessly. And there's a severe danger I might ask my colleague Sian from Wales to say something, if she's willing. Are you willing, Sian? Because you've been doing this, and there's another colleague over there as well.
Thanks, Bill. I'm very happy to say something. It's just something that we're doing in Wales. We've got about over 800 schools in Wales that's kind of using this way of working. We've got a new curriculum in Wales that's got creativity at the heart of it. And it's also got 6 areas of learning, with the expressive arts one of those areas of learning. But we've also got a creative leadership programme that's happening in Wales, whereby we're really looking at how we can develop creative leaders if we want schools to be able to work creatively, to be able to change their sort of culture. So we're kind of working with them on developing those and developing the skills and nurturing those skills, using the 5 habits at the heart of that I think we're all kind of familiar with in this space. And it's just an exciting time in Wales at the moment with the development of the new curriculum and with creativity being at the heart of it. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Sian. And I can see a colleague who I think is moving her. Yes.
Yeah, hi. So Helen Charman from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It was really just a comment on how might the framework also expand to connect up learning in schools with the wider creative and cultural ecology of learning. We have hundreds of thousands of young people coming through our museums every year, and absolutely brilliant teachers who are all really interested in connecting up the sort of infrastructure of the school curriculum with the wider kind of material culture of the cultural sector. So I think that could be a really interesting iterative opportunity.
Brilliant. Can I accept that iterative opportunity on behalf of Cassie, who's looking and scribbling? That would be fantastic to come and see what you're doing. We're nearly there. Just 1 minute just to round this off and then give you a stand up for 2 minutes moment before we move into the next session. Thank you so much to our wonderful 2 panelists and discussant. That was terrific. I'm struck very much by your thought about the use of the words assessment and measurement and how we might do that. We've just finished an intervention study in England, of all places, and conclude that they're the 2 words not to use. And when you start talking about evidencing students' progression in creative thinking, you find that the teaching profession seem to think this is an extremely sensible way of becoming more rigorous, more precise, and more engaged. So we might think about the language we use as well as the content. And the second thing to say is that if you are interested in what you've heard, it's definitely GEOC's strategic plan to find as many national jurisdictions and state jurisdictions who would be interested in taking on a coordinator role here. We know that just as with schools, it'll be very different in different jurisdictional ecologies. So if you would like to discuss that more, please talk to me or talk to Frankie, and we'd love to hear what you might say. It is 28 minutes past and 17 seconds. You've got 1 minute and 40 seconds to stretch. But before you do that, please give my panelists a round of applause.
It might be worth saying that we're also going to run it